Hello, everyone. Sal Khan here. Y'all might know me from Khan Academy and Schoolhouse.world, and obviously now we have this project of the Khan World School, and I can't tell you how excited I am for what we're about to do. We have a sample, a subset of our first cohort of entering ninth grade students at the Khan World School. And before we got started with this recording, we had a chance to do some introductions. And myself and other administrators at Khan World School have looked at a lot of the applications, and I can't tell you how much we've been anticipating to meet all of y'all and to see students from. There's several students from Arizona, as you might imagine, but from New Jersey, from Massachusetts, from California, from Alaska. It really is exciting to see that you can bring students from all over the country and the planet together. And what I'm hoping to do today is really I guess we could say this is our first seminar of Khan World School. Obviously, we're going to start doing these very regularly as we go into the school year, but we thought it would be fun to do one of these now that we know some of who y'all are, to start doing one of these in the summer and get to know each other. So the topic that I thought would be interesting is the topic of leadership, or what does it mean to be a leader? It's something you hear a lot about. Movies talk about it. You hear about it in politics. But let me just start with y'all. What does it define leadership? And don't look it up. You could look up obviously online what it means, but just to yourself, what does the word mean to you, just in everyday language? What it means to be a leader? What is leadership? And you could raise your hand, or you could jump in. Yeah, Patrick, and then Draven.
To me, it means leading people through difficult times and difficult challenges and getting everybody through.
So I think that's a great start, Patrick. So leading people through difficult times and difficult challenges. So do you think that that's part of it? That if can you lead in good times potentially?
Yeah, also. Yes, you can also lead in good times.
And what's the image in your head when you're saying leading them through it? Like what does it mean to lead someone through, I guess, a difficult time, or in some ways in good times?
Like making decisions and making sure everything's going correctly and everything's going as planned. And yeah, kind of like making sure everything is going well and stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. So, what I'm hearing from you is, one, there's an aspect of being a leader that is making decisions, that if you're a big group, someone's got to make decisions. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. And then I also heard from you being maybe accountable, or making sure things aren't slipping through the cracks, making sure that, I guess, people are being supported as you're trying to do whatever you're doing. Draven, how would you define leadership, or potentially add to what Patrick said?
I might add to it, I might add to what Patrick said, that that leadership, you need to lead your people that you need to lead, and through a clearer need to lead them clearly through like a challenge, and make sure that they don't have difficult trouble like facing a challenge of it.
So you're also introducing, or bringing up this idea of potentially a challenge, and you also brought this notion of clarity. Why was it that kind of like, what does that mean to you? Like, how have you seen examples of that,
Right.
just to make that tangible?
You need to be clear and concise on what to do, so that the people that you're leading aren't confused on what partner they need to do to make it through the challenge.
Okay, so there's this notion, Patrick introduced this notion of being able to be decisive, or at least help make decisions for the group. And then you're, I think, adding to that this notion that, hey, you got to be clear, because people need to be aligned. They need to be bought in to whatever decision maybe you had to make. Alila or Lila?
It's Lila, and leader doesn't need to be a form of government. It doesn't have to rule that sort of like that area. A leader could be just like trying, like, for example, the game Follow the Leader. In some cases that could be considered leadership in a different situation than just like, plain government leadership. So It could be like school group projects. There would be like this leader who kind of organizes everything.
I like that distinction, that leadership, I think we oftentimes gravitated to, there's certain jobs of being a leader. If you're a CEO, if you're the president, if you're a governor, you are a leader. But your point is that it's not necessarily tied to a role, that people can be a leader, obviously in a game, in a club, in a project. And I'll also introduce a little layer. I want to go deeper into it as we, get beyond the definition of what it means to be a leader or leadership. But, some of these roles that we associate with leadership, like being an executive or being a government official, when are they actually leading versus when are they not leading? Are they always leading just by definition of the role, or maybe sometimes they aren't leading? I definitely want to dig into that. But anyone else any more nuance to this notion of leadership? And then I actually want to go into a little bit of examples of times where you've seen effective leadership, not so effective leadership, maybe times you felt that you were able to lead well, times you felt that you couldn't lead well. But anyone else want to add to this notion of what is leadership, the definition of leadership? Elsa?
Yeah, so I wanted to say that like leadership is also, it's not really taking advantage of having the leadership and like telling everybody what to do. Leader is it's basically a servant to like the people they're leading, because you're the one trying to help them and like making decisions, and everybody looks up to you when you're a leader, and like so you have to lead by example. So you're more of like a servant than like, I mean, you're still the leader, but you're more of a servant to the people instead of like a strong like person who takes advantage of people and stuff, I guess.
Yeah, definitely want to double click. And I think your comment has evoked a lot of other thoughts in other folks, but let me double click on that a little bit. Because yeah, you'll hear after a lot of politicians, they'll say, I'm a public servant. They'll literally use the words that you just used. Elsa, draw that distinction a little bit more. Like, what would it look like if you're not taking that seriously? If you're not taking that public servant or that, servile, kind of a mindset versus when you do take it? How does that change what kind of leadership, or how does that look different, Elsa?
So if you're being a servant to the people, then the people will love you and they'll want you to like stay leader because they look up to you and you make a good example. But like being like a not good leader, I guess, or somebody who's not serving the people would be like taking advantage, using it to gain power yourself or gain like money or wealth, just anything to benefit yourself and not really benefit the people.
So it's kind of this notion of like, when your motivations are, you can say what you need to say, but at the end of the day, you're really about how can I get more power? How can I get more resources? You're not really a servant. While when you're really thinking about what can I do for others to maybe improve their state, and you truly are willing to do that, maybe sometimes at a cost to yourself, that is truly being a servant to the people. And you brought up this notion of like, they look up to you, they like you. I'll just throw it out there. Sometimes does a leader do things that maybe are unpopular, or that, people might not like you because you're doing it, but I'll just kind of put a little peg in that one. That's something for us to return to. But let's see, let's go to Gavin and then we'll go to Sean. Gavin?
I think that a leader is someone who can take advantage of people's strengths and organize them in a way to achieve a goal. And that goal could be their goal and you're helping them achieve it, or it could be your own and you're just having them help you. And I just feel like a leader is someone who can organize people to, just achieve a goal.
Yeah, that's interesting. That definition or that nuance of leadership is kind of, I've heard definitions of entrepreneurship. Some people would consider, when we study economics more, we'll talk about the factors of production, and people will talk about entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is this ability to put resources together in new ways that might create more value for the world. And your definition or your ad for leadership kind of does that. Like, it's someone who can say like, okay, what are people's strengths and weaknesses? What are the resources? And how can we put it together in ways that can achieve goals? It could be other people's goals. It could be your own goal. And even if it's your own goal, it might be your own goal for doing good for others, or it might be your own goal. Maybe it's a selfish goal, but maybe that still is leadership. Let's think about it. You've led people to some goal. I mean, as we go through our journey at Conn World School, we're going to study people like Napoleon and Caesar, and some people would, or Alexander the Great, and some people would call them great leaders, some people say, well, they were just trying to meet their own goals. We'll see. We'll see. You know, does the title apply? Sean and then Kulsum?
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of thinking like what you were saying. I mean, like this is about being, I think, more a good leader than a leader, because like there are certainly been bad leaders in history, and I think like the word leader, all it really means is that you're leading the people. It doesn't say that you're doing a good job or that you're not corrupt or anything like that. So, I mean, yeah, I think a leader is, yeah, just someone who is in charge.
That's an interesting distinction, because I think oftentimes we view, and in fact, even coming into this conversation, you know, your and Gavin's last comments actually changed my mind a little bit. We tend to view leadership as like a positive trait, but I think what you and Gavin are hinting at is maybe it's just a neutral thing that you do. And then there could be effective leaders and non-effective leaders. And then there could be good leaders and bad leaders. You might be very effective at making at making something bad happen in the world. And I think we could, you know, look at history books and, you know, even look at the world today, and maybe we can pinpoint people who are effective leaders, but maybe not taking things in a direction that at least we think might be good. There might be people with very good intent who want to do good, but maybe they're not effective at it. So there's more dimensions than at least I appreciated even coming into this conversation. Kulsum?
I think that being a leader is like about controlling yourself, having restraint, and being sincere. Because if you don't have those qualities, you really can't be a leader, and it doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. When you said that, it kind of reminded me, you know, we often think of a leader, there's a singular figure, and they are, you know, to use Gavin's comment, they're kind of coordinating many other people. But, you know, Kulsum, your point, it makes me think that even in our own minds, we have so many voices in our minds. We have so many competing motivations. We have so many impulses that we might want to do. And to some degree, you know, your point is like, maybe you have to have leadership over yourself in some ways before you can lead others. Maybe not. I mean, maybe there are some effective leaders that don't have good control, and maybe that's what makes them. And maybe there's some leaders that maybe overly control. I think, you know, I'm reminded sometimes where, you know, a politician looks like they're overly controlling what they're saying, and it's hard to connect with them. And maybe sometimes we connect with the ones, but there is something, it feels like, at least for good leadership, Kulsum, your point around being able to control yourself, be restrained, you know, as other people have said, maybe put other people first. I think this is actually incredible. It's expanded my mind as to what it means to be a leader already, and we can obviously keep adding to this. But I'm going to add another layer of inquiry into this. I'd love to hear examples, ideally from your own life. You could also cite examples in history or cite examples in current events, but I'd love to hear examples in your own life where you felt you were any of the above. You were an effective leader, ineffective leader. You thought you were doing good, but it ended up not being good. You thought you were doing something selfish, but it ended up being good for other people. I'm curious, or you saw someone in your life, someone at school, someone, you know, your parents, whatever it might be. Any examples of leadership that really stuck out to any of y'all? Patrick?
Well, oftentimes when my parents are not around, like when my parents are at work and we're home alone, I'm often the one in charge of my two younger brothers. And sometimes I'm a good leader, but also sometimes I can be really mean, and I'm not always a good leader, but I try to be a good leader.
First of all, points to you for the self-awareness that sometimes you're not optimal. We've all done that with our siblings. But Patrick, you know, when you think back on the last few times where you had to lead in this way, and this stuff definitely feels like leadership to me, if you're responsible for the household and your siblings, when have you, you know, what makes you think that there are times that you were a good leader, and sometimes what were the things that happened, or the thoughts you thought, or the things you did that maybe you weren't as good of a leader?
So my brothers, they're not super responsible, so I'll often get them back on track and make sure they don't do anything funny. But sometimes I am kind of like, sometimes I'm also really hard, and sometimes I'm just like really hard on them because they're just they're younger and they I'm older than them, so I know more. And yeah, sometimes I'm really hard, and I think I should be less hard on them.
No, so this is so I there are times, obviously, you're in charge of the household for these times of periods. You're making sure they're not getting in trouble, you're protecting them, you're making sure that they're not, they're maybe badly using their time. So I think, and I would agree with you, that would be categorized good leadership. And then you said, sometimes I'm hard on them. Do you think it's just being hard on them that makes, maybe you're less optimal, or maybe if it makes it sound like you feel like you're being harder than you need it to be? Maybe you're getting a little bit of a power trip. And look, as a parent, I feel this all the time. Like, I think I need to be a little bit hard on my kids, but maybe I got too hard on them. I mean, and if you're willing to share an example, or what do you think is is it just being hard that is not good, or is it a certain type of hard or in certain dimensions?
Oftentimes, like, if they do something that isn't great, but it's not like too bad, like just something small, and then sometimes I'll get too hard on them as if like they did something really bad.
And why do you do that? What do you think is the inner motivation that makes you do that?
I just want them to stop, so sometimes I go as hard as I can because I think it'll make them stop quicker, but that's not always true.
That's actually very reflective. I mean, I have 3 kids, and I still, there's some certain times you just so badly either wanted them to stop doing something or start doing something. Go do your Khan Academy work. How come you're doing your Khan Academy, or whatever it might be? Let's go read a book, or let's stop watching TV, or whatever it might be. And you want them to do it so badly that you want to almost force it. And maybe you'll yell at them, or I'm speaking for myself now, and then you feel bad about it. And especially when it doesn't, they might dig to their heels, like, why is older brother talking to me that way? Why is dad talking to me that way? And maybe you feel bad about it later on. But that's, for what it's worth, I think that's maybe a trait of a good leader, to maybe reflect on what they did and maybe realize, yeah, maybe I can tweak that a little bit next time. Maybe next time I can be a little bit more patient, or maybe next time I need to be harder. But that's a pretty cool example. I think Gavin and then Sean, examples that you just yourself, people you've observed, things you've read about.
All right. My example is from a project that I have long forgotten the purpose of or what it was about, but I do remember that there were 2 parts of it. And the first part, I was with some friends, and I would say I was acting as the leader of the group project, and everything went fine. And then the next day, during the same project, there were a new group of people that I was working with, and I tried to do the same thing, and it did not work at all. And I want to bring up the point of not everyone's idealistic leader is the same. Not one leader can lead everyone. And so just everyone has to be different in that way.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting example. I mean, we can imagine, some of the great leaders in history, Abraham Lincoln, or Mahatma Gandhi, or whoever we want to list. And maybe they were the right leader for that group in that period of time. But like, if you put Gandhi in charge of, 10 kindergartners who had to go to the zoo, maybe he would have been horrible at it. Or maybe Abraham Lincoln wouldn't have been a great product manager at a tech company. It's a strange thought. But your particular example, Gavin, why do you think your leadership style worked with the first group and then didn't work with the second group?
I would say kind of conflicting interests and opinions. So the first group was all people that I was friends with, and that we all had similar interests and we liked being with each other. And the second group was they wanted to do the project in a different way compared to the first group. And they were not people that I personally get along with. And I feel like a leader has to resonate with their followers in order for them to be successful.
Yeah, there's a lot in that. So it sounds like in the first group, there's already a friend circle there. So there's, you as friends, you've already selected each other, maybe as people that you enjoy time with. There's probably also some trust there that had already built up, some respect that had already built up, so that, when you ask people to do something, they're like, oh yeah, I trust Gavin. I'll go in that direction. Well, in the second group, it sounded like maybe that wasn't there. It sounded like there might even be ahead of time a little bit of distrust or a little bit of dislike. And people got to a different place. Maybe there was a larger diversity of thought. And you did introduce another idea that I think is worth, we've been talking about leadership, but you brought up followers or followership. And it does make me wonder, does leadership always require followership? And then is followership also, a nuanced thing? Like in your mind, Gavin, was it like, well, actually, I'm curious, have you gone back and said how you wish you had led the second group differently? Or do you think there's things that they could have done different in their followership that would have made things work better?
I would say it's equal reformity for both parties there. I know that I could have been less me and I could have tried to reform the leadership that I was trying to provide to match them better, but I also don't think they wanted my leadership in the first place. So sometimes it's better to just stand down and let somebody else do leadership, even if you're used to being in the leadership role.
Yes, a lot in this that we could spend hours. I mean, this is fascinating. I mean, you bring up this notion of like you saying maybe I could have been less meek. And look, I think that all the time when I had an unsuccessful, maybe I was too strong, maybe I was too meek. I didn't really say what I believe, but that's, I think, something that every person who's vaguely in leadership is always trying to figure out that tension. And then you're saying, yeah, maybe there are times that it is okay to say, okay, maybe I'm not the leader here, or maybe the best thing for the leader to do is step aside and let something go a slightly different course than what they had originally thought about. I mean, it's fascinating to think about these things. But Sean, examples or any commentary on anything else you heard?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about like examples from my own life, and I think I've spent a reasonable amount of time with like younger kids, and I think I do okay when I'm with like children that I'm not related to, but with my sister in particular, I think sometimes I have issues, and I think that might be because like once the element of like having to maintain control comes in, and it's not just about like having a good time and then letting the other kids' parents, manage them when all the happiness is over. You actually have to like put your foot down and say, no, you can't draw on the walls. That's when I think, for me at least, it starts to get difficult, because it's a fine line between, being like just and crossing the line, and not being a good leader at all. So.
No, what you're saying is fascinating, and you shouldn't feel bad. I think everyone feels this dynamic that sometimes it's harder to lead your own family than other people's families. Sean, why do you think that is? Why do you think it's harder to manage or lead your own sister than maybe other kids of the same age?
I think there might be some emotional baggage because we're not just like, we don't see each other. We see each other very commonly, so we're not just acquaintances.
And what as much as you're willing to share, and feel free to share nothing, but like, give examples of the type of emotional baggage, things that might go into your head that make you less effective when you're trying to manage your sister, or things that might be going in her head when she's becoming less easy to manage.
Yeah, well, I think I think she has. I think we both have some of our own psychological issues. But sort of when we get matched together, maybe our personalities are sort of incompatible. Because she is a very like extroverted. She really likes to talk a lot, I think, and personally that sort of drives me crazy, and sometimes it can lead me to lose my temper. So yeah, I think that might be another dimension, that when like your followers are not sorts of people that match with your personality, and sometimes it can be harder to empathize with them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, that's actually a great example because just even the way you described it, when we spend a lot of time with people, you tend to build like almost stereotypes about them. You build inferences about who they are, you build narratives about who they are. And look, sometimes it's based on real data, right? Like, it sounds like your sister is more extroverted than you are, and maybe in family gatherings at the dinner table or whatever, maybe she takes more airtime than you, and maybe sometimes, I just imagine there's some people who talk over other people, et cetera, and then that triggers you. You're like, oh, I can never get a word out or something, and then when you even see a little bit of them doing that, you immediately assume, hey, maybe they're doing that again. Let me shut it down, and maybe the other person says, oh, why are they shutting me down, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's all this other stuff that happened before that all of a sudden, going back to Gavin's example, sometimes you have this well of trust and friendship that maybe makes it easier to lead. Actually, sometimes maybe the friendship makes it harder to lead, because you're like, hey, we're all equal. Why does Gavin get to make the decision versus all of us? Because we're all equal. And obviously, if there's some narrative ahead of time, what you're describing with you and your sister, it might make it a little bit harder. I'll throw out one other thing. I think sometimes the stakes with family feel lower, like, with a stranger, like, wow, if I act up, they might not be willing to deal with me, but family, hey, we're going to be together no matter what, no matter what we do. So Lila.
So my friend, she doesn't really like to lead, but she is, like, in my opinion, a natural born leader in some ways. And like everyone in my old class when I was in in-person school, they all, like, looked up to her, and some of them, in particular she was kind of annoyed with, but it was a very close friend of hers, would ask help for homework, but, like, after she would say, yeah, sure, I'll help you, she would actually leave the project to her on the last day. And then she, being this person who just wanted to help everyone, just did the project for her. And like, she didn't like people, she didn't think she was a leader, she would never actually say that. But in my opinion, the best types of leaders are the people who don't actually want to lead, because they want to be, because most of the time they're just like, other people need to have a chance in some ways, and so they kind of have, so they all are, they want to be so happy and just, like, connected in some way with them. For example, like, somebody who, they see good in everyone in some situations, and they're like, well, this one has a better quality in this certain area, they should lead.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I mean, a couple of things, just make sure I understand. So you're saying this friend who you view as a natural born leader, when someone asks for help, they would do the work for them, or they would kind of step aside and convince the person to do the work for themselves?
First things first, that she would actually try to convince the person, and in this scenario that I was talking about, the person left it on the last day. The day was basically due, and she just didn't want her friend to get in trouble, so she just was, even though that person had to, like, go somewhere at the time, she was just like, it was almost impossible for her not to turn it in, and her grade was basically going to fail because of the project, so she did it for her, even though she was supposed to be working with someone else on the same project.
This is a really good example, because it's kind of this, and as a parent, I'll say I'm always debating this, like, how much do you support, say, your kids or others or family members, and how much do you have to do some kind of tough love, like sometimes for them to feel the penalties of dropping the ball on something. It sounds like, if I'm hearing what you, this is someone who's very giving to other people, like is always putting other people first. And we started this conversation thinking about leaders. We kind of said good leaders always put the other people's needs ahead. Maybe it's worth thinking about, is that always the case, that sometimes a leader actually also has to think about what they need? If when you go on a plane, they say put your own oxygen mask on first before so that you can, before you can help others. So I do wonder that, and I do wonder, is this friend actually being a good leader or a good mentor, whatever it might be, by doing the work for them? I'll say that. But what are the other traits that you think make them a natural born leader? Is it mainly this desire to always put other people first?
Yes, and also, yeah, just like trying to put others first. And she has very good empathy, and what your passion is, that's her passion. To basically she'll try to find something in common with everyone no matter what, even though she doesn't like to like go forward and say like, oh, look at me, you should all follow me sort of person. She's more like, okay, let's figure out like a way to have like, she has a mutual agreement with everyone. She has some sort of balance. And like at school I had like, she had basically no enemies.
So this is an interesting character profile of this person, because it sounds like, so first of all, you bring up the term empathy. What's your definition for the word empathy, Lila?
She feels for others in many different ways, and she's like, I understand, I get it, and if you need help, I want to help you.
So
And
yeah,
lots of situations she does help a lot.
so yeah, there's kind of sympathy where you can feel for them, and then you also said empathy, like she can kind of see from their point of view. She can put herself in their shoes, and people appreciate that. Everyone appreciates someone. So it sounds like her source, her superpower is, it sounds like she authentically, people know that she has got their back. It's authentic. It isn't just kind of fake. She's just not just words. Also, this ability, empathy that must build trust. You just said that, like, everyone. So that's a lot of political capital or friendship capital or respect capital, whatever you want to call it. Have you ever seen her? Is it all about that though? Because, do you think sometimes a leader might have to do something that's unpopular, or make people do something that they find a little bit painful or something like that? Or do you think it is more about, hey, can we just, make sure everyone feels good type of thing? How do you feel about that, Lila?
I think that she sometimes, I believe, should be a little bit more like telling your friends when they need help, and like saying, like, more trying to lead them towards like, you can figure this out on your own. I'm going to give you as best as I can, but I don't want to complete the entire project. And she wasn't all too happy with it, and I was like, why don't you just tell the teacher? And she said, well, I don't want my friend to get in trouble. I want to help her so much. And I was trying in that situation hard not to say like, she needs to figure this out. And it's just not her character. She can't really just let that person fail. It's like, she's my friend, I need to help her no matter what.
Yeah, no, and look, I gotta say, I have people in my family that, it's not me, but I have people in my family like that, and they're always giving to other people. And it's like, at some point you have to, and their lives sometimes get taken over by other people, and sometimes people take advantage of them. And we can debate whether that's either healthy for the person, or whether that's truly leadership, or that's something else that's kind of, servile support, not servile leadership, like we were talking about earlier. Gavin?
I wanted to bring up, in my opinion, one of the most important things with leadership. And I kind of thought of this after what Sean said about his sister. And I think that a huge part of leadership is people's preconceived notions of you. So for him, I don't want to speak for him, but I think it could be his sister has seen him at his lowest and his weakest, and sees him when he's not always at his best. And kind of back to with my classmates and not wanting to follow me, I have always been a kind of a more talkative goofball, goof off in class kind of person. And so my friends have seen me when I'm more serious and I can do better. But random people in class, they only see the goofy side of me. So why would you want to listen to someone like that? And another example for that could be, say there was a master criminal who got released from prison and got reformed to be a better person. People who were already criminals are going to be more likely to look up to that person as a leader, rather than people, just average Joe people, because just his background and their preconceived notions of him being a criminal aren't going to make them want to see him as a leader.
Yeah, but what you're just saying is fascinating, and it does touch very well on what Sean was saying before, is that, like, these storylines that you bring to the table with ahead of time, no matter what, you could do textbook leadership. Two different people could do exactly textbook leadership to the exact same group, and one person might have a really good outcome because that group, because of the narrative they built about the person, says, yeah, this is someone I trust, this is someone I could follow, this is someone who's got cred with me, while the others are like, no, I don't know. This person's pretty different than me. I don't know if I trust them. I don't know if they really have cred. It's fascinating. So there isn't like some objective magic leadership. It's all of these things. And then, how can you even build the cred, et cetera, et cetera. I could talk about this for hours, but I realize we're running low on time, and I want to make sure, one thing I'd like to do is just kind of debrief, and I'm just going to go through everybody, just any reflections you have about this conversation. Has it at all changed your perspective, or has it reinforced your perspective on what a leader is? And while you do that, I'll throw out another question on, has it affected how you might try to be a leader in different contexts? And I'll also throw out, are good leaders good followers? Could good followers be good leaders? Are they different? Or is it kind of a muscle that you need to build on both sides? But yeah, well, I'll start with you, Draven.
If I were to say it, I would say this has reinforced my view on a leader, about how leaders need to be clear and concise to their subjects, or whatever, so that their subjects can do work themselves without asking the leader every single time they run into an obstacle.
I love that. And you bring up another thing, like you got to kind of, quote, teach people to fish, not just fish for them.
Yeah.
And do that in very clear and aligned ways. No, thanks for that, Draven. Daniel, and any reflections? I'm going to call on all of y'all, so I'm not picking on Daniel. Any reflections on the conversation? Any ahas? Anything to add?
I think it's interesting about the thing of like, just because a leader is effective, that doesn't mean like they have good ideals. Like Hitler was able to lead like pretty effectively. Like he had a lot of followers, and like really devoted followers, but like obviously like Hitler didn't have good ideas. Like I think it's interesting to like that effect. Just because you're effective doesn't mean you're a good leader.
Yeah, no, I think you gave the most clear example of that, of someone who is strangely effective, but horrible in where they led people to. But thanks for that, Daniel. Lila, I'm just going through my rows that as I see them. Lila, any reflections on today's conversations?
I do. It kind of reinforced my idea of like a leader. I had this conversation already with my mom once we received the email, but another thing about being a leader, just like leaders can be followers, and followers can be leaders. And then there's this zone in the middle where there's this person who is a leader and a follower at the same time. Like, for example, let me give it like the example of a government position. There's like the president, and then there's people below the president. Even though the people below the president still have followers to get voted into office, they aren't technically the leader of the group in some way.
Yeah, no. So you're kind of saying like everyone has to be a leader and a follower, and so and to some degree maybe be effective. I mean, there was that quote that I sent in the pre-read. He who has never learned to obey cannot be a good commander, and that's Aristotle. And it's it is kind of like, to some degree, you don't want to be a hypocrite. You have to show that you have to model what it means to be a follower, to also be a leader, and most of us have to do both in our everyday lives. Sean?
I don't think my horizons have been broadened. Yeah, no, it was definitely an interesting conversation, but I mean, I think we all, to some degree, are on the same page about like leaders and good leaders.
Yeah. No, and hopefully you got some toolkits for better diplomatic relations with your sister. Emma, any reflections on today?
Yeah, so I think that the conversation helped me learn a little bit about my classmates, and it also the question about whether leaders and followers are the same or different. I think that there are natural leaders, but that just because you're not a natural leader doesn't mean that you can't become a leader. It just means that you have to work a little harder at it.
Yeah, No, that's a good point. And, I think, the conversation with Lila earlier, like some people, natural leaders, are they really leading, or is it or is it more of a, but we can dig more into that in the future. Patrick, any reflections?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting what Gavin and Todd said about like having trouble they're better at leading certain people than others. And that's also me. I'm better at leading people, like I was better at leading people in schools during group projects, but I'm not very good at leading my two younger brothers. They don't always follow me. They don't always follow me. And I thought that was really interesting.
No, appreciate that. Thanks for jumping in with that first example. Elsa, reflections.
So I think most of this conversation reinforced like what I think of like a good leader to be, but also I think it really opened my eyes for more of like the follower side as well. Like, and also just like even if like I lead something like a group project, say, and the people it doesn't turn out that great, it's not completely like my fault. There is a whole nother side to like the follower side, and also just being a follower, like kind of maybe being easier on whoever's leading me, just like giving them a chance first before judging them and immediately making up a decision about whether to follow them or not. Like let them try and give them a chance before like judging them and making your decisions on what you think, like if they're a good leader or not.
Yeah, I love that. The empathy needs to flow both ways. It's easy to throw darts at the leader sometimes, but they're human too. And so you have to have that empathy. Emmanuel?
Yeah, I think this helped me. This conversation motivated me to become a leader who guides others and make good decisions.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. I mean, at the end of the day, that is what the hope is that, there's opportunities for leadership and followership. I think followership is also a craft all around us. And hopefully as we have these conversations, it's like, hey, I think I'm finding myself in one of these patterns now. Maybe there's another way of doing things. Maybe there's a way to optimize this, get better at it. Kulsum, any reflections on the day?
Yeah, so I really learned a lot, like listening to everyone and what they think about leadership. And it also helped me learn about like the positive and negatives about leadership. Like, it's like great to be a leader, but sometimes when people fight for power, fight for being a leader, they can have destructive behavior, which it really doesn't help anyone, and instead just has a different effect.
Yep, absolutely. Gavin, any more reflections?
I wouldn't say my opinion about leadership has changed, but it has expanded. Just new ideas based on everyone's comments. I think it has definitely been an interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Riley, any reflections off today's conversation?
I definitely feel like my viewpoint has expanded on there's a difference between a good and a bad leader, and it's not necessarily always a good thing.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, my reflection here, I'll tell you these questions that you have asked yourself, I struggle with these continually in my life. And one thing I remind myself, and I remind people of all ages, is that struggle is actually the good part. The struggle can be uncomfortable. I all the time, I'm in my work at Khan Academy or other things I'm doing, I'm like, okay, do I need to be stronger here? Do I need to really kind of pound my fist on the table, or did I do it too much? And do I need to create more space for other people? And the honest answer is it depends. It depends, I think, and y'all have given me better appreciation of part of the leader is just trying to figure out what is possible given the group that you have, and not just go into an automatic script, so to speak, and say, okay, let me feel the group. Let me see what they need. Let me see how to, we talk a lot about personalization of education. Maybe there's a personalization of leadership that you can feel the room, feel the group, and say, what do they need? And maybe what they need is not for me to be the leader. Maybe there's someone else here but maybe they do need me to be the leader. I had a friend in business school who's a Catholic priest, and he said something that was his name's Tom Doyle. And he said something very powerful to me. It was in class. It was kind of a session like this. And he said, a lot of people try to shy away from leadership because they're like, why me? Why should I step up? And they're like, in some ways, you're withholding a gift to others if you do that as well. Sometimes you say, oh, well, you could be an obnoxious leader and you're taking liberties from people, or you're taking airtime from people. But also, if you have something to give and you don't give it, and that could be your leadership, and make the world a better place, that might be also a bad thing. So I'm also struggling with these same questions. So I think these are things we're going to visit over and over again. I think this notion of effective, but maybe effective in the wrong direction. Daniel brought up the example of Hitler, who I think rightfully history has written off as a evil leader. But there's others that you think about someone like Julius Caesar, and was it good that he turned Rome essentially from a republic into a dictatorship, even though history has kind of, we still have the month of July still carries his name, on his way to becoming this very popular general for the Roman Empire. He killed 1/3 of the Celts in Northern Europe. Like, he did some pretty extreme things on his way. Is it good that Rome became an empire versus a republic? We'll talk about all these things. We'll have a little different examples, but I think this was a good start. So thank you all. Thank you for participating, and thank you for expanding my horizons on what it means to be a leader.